Production and factory settings bring their own set of hurdles for wireless connections. Harsh conditions, both indoors and out, create a daunting task for engineers to work through. Now let me tell you, those engineers ain't looking to back down from a challenge like this, no sir. This here's where we gather round to tackle them hurdles, swap thoughts, and lend a hand. Welcome to the Industrial Wi-Fi Shop with your hosts, Scott and Jeremy.
All right, welcome back, everybody. This is yet another episode of the Industrial Wi-Fi Shop. My name is Scott McNeil. With me, as always, my co-host, Jeremy Baker. Say hi, Jeremy.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, I got a little bit more out of him this time. Normally, it's just hi. Oh, we got a great show coming up today. We've got the guys from Oscium /MetaGeek. I'm about to go all fanboy on their butts. It's going to be a good time. But we need to get through some housekeeping stuff first. This is our last call for the Wi-Fi Explorer Pro 3 definitive user guide giveaway. All right. So if you guys have not checked it out and have not put in to win one of these things, we've got two of them that Jeremy's giving away. One winner will be from IT. Winner will be from OT. So there's a Google Forms link that will be in the show notes. Hit the link, fill it out, and put in your entry to possibly win one of these guides. But additionally, Jeremy, I'll let you talk a little bit more to that. We also have a couple licenses. Oh, Jeremy, you are muted, sir.
All right, technical failure number one. Yeah, so I messaged Adrian, and he said he would be happy to donate a couple of licenses. So along with those, we'll send one. But if you already have it, let us know, and then that way we can kind of pass it on to somebody else and help get more people have hands-on with the tool. And then also, this is just we mentioned this last time, but in Keith Parsons' Heavy Wireless, it was episode 45. They did a deep dive on the tool, so you can get kind of a good overview of what it's capable of. It was an excellent. I've listened to it probably 3 or 4 times now. Oh yeah, and then
and the relation to that,
also along with that, who we have today, this will be relevant, but there's integration for the Oscium Lucid Spectrum Analyzer in Wi-Fi Explorer 3, so it's pretty handy. It's an awesome tool. But I've made a bracket for myself that you can clip it over your monitor. And I posted that on Thingiverse. So if you want to print it yourself, that'll be posted in the show notes too. And then another thing that I came across is as I'm preparing to try and pass the CWAP tomorrow, the Certified Wireless Analysis Professional is, I'm going to hope I say this right, but the guy's name is Robin DeClote. And he's got a blog called Robin Wi-Fi. I've been reading up on that, and it's kind of him summarizing chapters as he goes through stuff and kind of describing the journey towards some of the certifications he's taken. So that's been something pretty interesting I found recently.
That's
Scott,
awesome.
some upcoming events?
Yeah, so we've got on our radar here in the U.S., we've got some WICO events coming up. One in Chapel Hill, North Carolina on May 14th. I will be at this one, and I'm actually going to be talking about fun with spectrum analysis. So, it's kind of a great tie-in for today's episode. I'm just going to go and talk about some of the more crazy interferers I found in the field and how they just completely destroys RF and the great imagery that comes along with it. It'll be a lot of fun. The day after that, on the 15th, there is a WICO event in Philadelphia. I don't have all the details on that, but you can hit wico.org to check that out. And then 5/29, Jeremy will be in Nashville for the Nashville WICO event. Are you still planning on doing a curve demo for that, Jeremy?
Oh yeah, man. Exceltex shipped me some site survey batteries and some directional antennas. I got my hands on a couple of 9167s. I've got a couple of 9165s. And Dave Rice is going to bring some 9165Ds. So I think we're going to have full parking lot. We even got Ollie on rollerblades potentially as a mobile client.
That right there might be worth the price of admission. I may have.
We need to see if we can get him in like a Jim Dangle outfit, some short shorts, and
I don't know. Ollie in booty shorts would be kind of frightening, if you ask me.
And then just kind of a reminder too is, you know, we've mentioned the automation ladies put together this OT SCADACon. So you can go to otscada.com to check that out. Looks like it's a really interesting conference, and they're going to have presenters kind of from almost the full control stack for that stuff, and it's in towards the end of July in Houston. PLCs, HMI, IO, machine safety, machine vision, robots, cobots. There's just going to be a lot of fun, and then also check out their podcast. It's pretty fun, and that's their website's automationladies.io.
Yeah, this is
I think that's it.
Their second year for this conference.
Yeah, it's the second
year. Smaller conference, but it's very, very educational. If you have the opportunity, I would check it out. All the pictures and everything from last year looked like it was a lot of fun. Plus the OT content, if you are not an OT person, is great to, if nothing else, familiarize yourself with the landscape. The more you as a wireless professional can understand and experience, the easier jobs in this realm can be for you. If you're not an OT native like Jeremy and I. So let's dive into the fun stuff. This episode 15 of the Industrial Wi-Fi Shop. What's the frequency, Kenneth? So today with us we have B Square. We have Brian Lee and Brian Tuttle from Oscium /MetaGeek. How are you now, fellas?
Awesome. Thanks for the invite. Really appreciate that.
Yeah,
thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm stepping all over you.
No worries. Happy to be here. There wasn't any mention of anyone fanboying on my butt before I got here, so I'm a little nervous, but I think I'm ready.
If you guys could just take a quick second and tell everyone about yourselves.
Sure. My name's Brian Lee. My brother and I started Oscium over 15 years ago. And so we've been making a variety of tools at Oscium that whole time. And so, more recently in the last, I'd say 8 to 10 years, we focused more on wireless professionals. Initially, when we got our start, we had started on, our first product was actually an oscilloscope. So we've made oscilloscopes over the years, power meters, logic analyzers, spectrum analyzers, which is what we're going to talk about today, and a whole bunch of products underneath each one of those verticals.
And I am Brian Tuttle. I met Ryan Woodings, the founder of MetaGeek, when we were working together at Cypress Semiconductor. And then he launched MetaGeek as a side job. And then I guess it was 15 years ago now. After he had left Cypress and started working at MetaGeek full time, I ran into him at the grocery store, and he asked me to come over and do some software moonlighting to help with a issue with the original Wi-Fi. And I had just had my wife and I had just had our first child, and so I wasn't really in the market to do any moonlighting. So I talked him into hiring me full time. I was the first full time employee at MetaGeek, and worked there all the way until the end of 2020. We all know what happened in 2020. It was not great for the Wi-Fi industry, and now I'm back. So really excited to be back in the saddle at MetaGeek and in partnership with Oscium. It's kind of the dream come true.
Well, I got to tell you guys, I have been and still am a huge fan and advocate of MetaGeek. It was one of the first primary tools that I really kind of Wi-Fi analytic tools that I kind of cut my teeth on. I still have my old Wi-Spy 2.4 adapter tucked away in my gear. It opened up a whole different universe of Wi-Fi troubleshooting for me. I'm a visual learner, visual spatial, and it just seeing raw RF and that kind of display is really what got my brain to click on a lot of different concepts that I was struggling with. And from there on out, the channelizer became my go-to for everything. You know, if there was an issue, the first thing I was doing was checking out, because if nothing else, I wanted to be able to rule out anything else interfering with what was going on before we tried to dive into anything else. So like in the general rule of thumb in the realm of IT is layer one, right? You always want to check that layer one, that physical layer first. Well, that's exactly what MetaGeek is, right? That's what Channelizer is.
Yeah.
It's checking that wireless layer one, and you get the visualization to go along with that to really help your brain kind of understand. You know, I've got all the dongles. I just like saying the word dongle. Uh, and Channelizer has been great. It's gone through some iterations. It's gone through some improvements. You know, because you guys have adapters for 900 meg. Well, you had adapters for 900 megahertz, but that's a point of contention that I'm going to bring up again here in just a moment. 2.4, 5 gig, and now 6 gigahertz. The reporting tool that's built into Channelizer is actually really solid. And I'm not afraid to tell you that I plagiarize the crap out of half the stuff that you have in there for explanations for various reports that I write for clients, because
Awesome.
it's very clear, concise, and helps people understand what they're looking at. It's easy to learn. It's easy to use. I don't know, man. I can't uh, speak highly of it enough. But it's not just Channelizer, right? It's IPA with originally IPA with its wireless packet capture and analytics, right? And then that eventually kind of morphed into, although IPA standalone is still a product,
Mhm.
uh, it kind of morphed into what became Tonic, which I really liked, and then which then morphed into a weird redheaded stepchild of Channelizer 6,
That's right.
which from the end user standpoint, kind of I think was a little overboard as it tried to combine everything into one thing, but it lost some of the specifics that Channelizer itself really drew me to, you know, to it. And so when the announcement came back that we're keeping Channelizer 5, I was all screaming and girly crying, and it was a beautiful day, and the sun was shining, and dogs were barking, and rainbows, and puppy dogs, and all was good in the universe, right? Luke Skywalker defeated Vader, and I was a happy man.
Yeah, yeah. So, first of all, I just want to say how much it means to me to hear that Channelizer was part of your journey in terms of understanding what really is kind of a black art. RF is
It's magic.
it is a very, it's kind of like the intersection of science and magic in my mind. And I'm also a visual learner, so I've always kind of been a target customer. It's really easy if you're thinking about starting a company out there. By the way, pro tip: build a product that you want, the way you want it to be, and just hope that other people see things the same way. That's how we did it, and it worked out great. So thanks a lot. Really does mean a lot. I've talked to a lot of people through the years who got their start in network engineering, in wireless engineering, through Channelizer, got introduced to MetaGeek through Insider. It means a lot to both Ryan and I, and it's cool to be able to keep that legacy alive here with Oscium as well. As far as you were talking about the reintroduction of Channelizer, yeah, we see spectrum analysis as a fundamentally different thing than packet analysis.
I could
They're
not
both,
agree more.
yeah, and they're both incredibly important. But when you're, like you said, when you're starting, you want to get that link layer, that physical layer, and validated before you go jump into the information that's flowing across that link and try to make sense of what's happening at the protocol level. Those are different things. I think adding Spectrum to a packet application is a reasonable thing to do. I'm glad that the MetaGeek app includes both packets and Spectrum, but if you're doing hardcore spectrum analysis, you need a spectrum analyzer.
Absolutely. Well, and the thing is too, is protocol analysis only applies to structured communication. Spectrum analysis applies to everything that's going on in the raw RF universe, right? So it doesn't care if it's structured communication or not. It's going to visualize exactly what's going on in that RF spectrum, which is a huge, huge deal, especially when you live and breathe in the universes that Jeremy and I do, where your possibilities for non-Wi-Fi based interference are much, much greater than they are in your standard environment versus, say, like enterprise or higher education and different things like that. SpecAn has its place in those fields, but when it comes to the dirty manufacturing places that I go, between various electrical motors and VFDs. VFDs is a prime example. VFD, for those who do not know, is a variable frequency drive, and these are essentially boxes that control the mass amount of flow of electricity that either speed up and slow down motors to get them to do certain things, right? By their very nature, it's a variable frequency drive. It emits EMI RFI. And if they're not shielded correctly, or if their shielding is left open, it is emanating all manner of EMI RFI in variable frequencies because it is a variable frequency drive. I have captures myself of an unshielded drive raising the noise floor in the 900 megahertz spectrum over 20%. I mean, it's ridiculous. And then it makes communication in that field very, very difficult, right? And so these are things that we are more apt to encounter in our universe than you will in other places. So that just increases the need for the understanding of what's going on in the raw RF. Because if you can't control it and you cannot mitigate it, you have to work around it, right? And so the only way you can visualize that or see that is through spectrum analysis, because a protocol an analyzer is not going to see any of that. It's not structured communication if it doesn't have the beacon frames and it doesn't have the IP structure or whatever. It's not going to see it. Now, to circle back around, though, you mentioned Insider. That was my first protocol analyzer and scanner, and that was the one I cut my teeth on, and I love that one too. And I still have it on. I have the latest version on my machine, and so I like it, and it's really fun.
Yeah, you mentioned dealing with all of that interference, and really after I left MetaGeek, I went to a company called Cradlepoint. And I was working on cellular stuff. And there were lots of people through the years who would come up to us at conferences and say, yeah, I really wish you guys would make a Wi-Fi that covered the cellular spectrum. And we would say, I don't know. That sounds kind of weird. It's licensed spectrum. If there's interference in that spectrum, it's a FCC violation. Somebody's already got to be policing that. Are we really going to sell any Wi-Fis that are focused on cellular? And so we never actually did build one. And then I went to work at Cradlepoint, and you're dealing with these cellular endpoints, and you're literally flying blind. And it's like, is this thing on? Is this thing transmitting on the channel that I believe it's transmitting on? It makes a world of difference to be able to see RF. And even when you're not contending with interference, just being able to validate that the link exists and that the link is what you think it is, and that the link is as healthy as you believe it is, it was a real eye opener for me. And so, I apologize to all of you who came up to me and said, I'd like to have a Wi-Fi for cellular. I get it now. I've finally seen the light, and I'm willing to listen.
Well, in that same vein of since we have you in such a great and happy mood, right? You guys got to bring back the Wi-Fi 900. Mine is Mine's on its last legs. I got it from eBay. I don't know how much longer it's going to last, but I use it all the time. I need a new one. Um, and 900 megahertz people thought was going away, and it's not. 900 megahertz, the 902 to 928 in the US and various other flavors in other countries, it's not going away. You got Wi-Fi Halo, which is now starting
Yeah.
to really come on the scene. In the industrial universe, there is so much IoT connectivity in that 900 megahertz spectrum. Um, the need for it is not quite going away. Now, do I think it's going to be a massive seller like some of these others? Not necessarily, but there is a need for it, and I do believe you could make a few bucks off of it. Plus, I really, really, really need one.
What do you say, B. Lee?
Yeah, well, Scott, I get where you're going with this. We do have a spectrum analyzer that covers that ground, right? 900 megahertz. It works with Channelizer Lite. And I know you, based on what you just said, you're a fan of Channelizer, and we do have coverage for that. And so, depending on the state of your, the union of your current WiSpy 900, we can cover that need. Although I know that you're also saying, hey, the software is a piece of that too. So tracking.
Yeah, well, we can, as we've demonstrated since the acquisition, Channelizer can support the WiPry family with first-class spectrum analysis experience. We have not added support for the non Wi-Fi band versions of the WiPry, but that's definitely something that's gettable. So
yeah.
If you're looking for sub 1 gigahertz WiSpy, WiPry hardware, and you're looking for support in Channelizer, get in touch with Brian and I and let us know, and we'll prioritize that work accordingly.
Yeah.
Well, and it does, like, I just wanted to give you guys some grief, but the thing is getting that 900 megahertz support on some piece of hardware for Channelizer is really the thing.
Yep.
Like I said, Wi-Fi Halo is making its emergence. It was a little slow to start. Everybody was talking about it. Nobody could really get their hands on the hardware, but things are starting to be manufactured specifically for that space now. And the need is there. It's just, I don't think is in everybody's face yet. But as more devices start coming out specifically for Wi-Fi Halo, I think you'll start hearing more people talk about it. I know there are several other industrial radios that actually use 902 to 928 for data transfer. And it would be great to be able to check that out as well. And that's exactly what I use my ancient WiSpy 900X for.
Well, also, in the sub 1 gig, I actually don't tell my boss this, but I ordered one of the 790s because I was like, man, we might have to do some Halo testing. And then, it got in and we immediately got like hey, we need to kind of figure out how far this RFID reader is projecting. So it even works for UHF for like the 928 UHF. So it was really valuable for me, except I had to, I was walking like 1,000 feet, still getting strong signal coming off of it because it was still detectable.
The sub 1 gigahertz band is how I learned about what a Black Swan event is. We developed a WiSpy 950 for Japan. They were going to put the whole power grid in Japan on 950 megahertz based smart grid. And we developed the product. We got through regulatory. We built support for it in Channelizer. We had our first manufacturing run completed, and the earthquake, tsunami, nuclear catastrophe, Fukushima happened, and that thing sat on the shelf from that point forward. But man, that was really eye-opening. I'd never had a product just be killed by the hand of God like that. That was pretty wild.
That's insane.
Yeah, it was obviously a lot of other folks had much worse outcomes because of that catastrophe than we did, but it was wild. That's a unique experience in my professional life.
So on another note, with the Channelizer or any of the MetaGeek suite, do you guys have any plans or thoughts about making it compatible with various tablets? A lot of the software in the wireless universe has gone that route with different flavors for tablets, especially some even with cell phones. Is that a possibility for that software suite?
I will give every product manager's least favorite answer from an engineer. It's technically possible.
Oh, I thought you were
It
going to say
is.
it depends because that's our favorite.
Well, it's sort of the same. Yeah, it's you know, we're always looking at tablets, at phones. We used to have one of my favorite products that we ever had was Insider when it was on Android. We even had Insider on iOS for a very brief window. I love
I wish
the
you still had Insider for Android because I had
yeah
it for a very short period and I loved it.
yeah. The problem with the handheld devices in general is that they're always being manufactured, designed for battery optimization. That's always top of mind for Samsung, for Apple, for LG, for anybody who's building handheld devices. And with the hardware requirement for Spectrum, there's always going to be a tricky relationship between how you draw power for that device and whether or not you can draw that power off of the host. And then there's not a reasonable argument, I don't think, for restricting access to BSSID to beacons that are being captured over the air. But both of those platforms have made the decision to restrict access to BSSID. So things like Insider, where you're just listening for beacons and then plotting the RSSI of the beacons that you see on the device, has been ruled something that is not supported by those OSs. So that presents some challenges. We're not afraid to take on challenges. What we don't love is finding ourselves in a situation where we build a really great app like Insider for Android, and then the rules change and suddenly we can't do anything with that software. So I'll just say we're apprehensive about our relationship with both Android and iOS in terms of, can we really trust those platforms to be a partner for software? We love touch UI. We certainly believe that the best tool is the one that you have with you, and so everybody always has their phone in their pocket. We'd really love to have our products on those devices. But we're trying to figure out how to do that in a way that doesn't put us at risk of the sort of the fact that, like you said, there's really not a lot of people who are Wi-Fi professionals. There's really not a lot of people who are wireless in general professionals. And so I understand why Apple and Google with Android don't want to optimize to support that small segment of the population. My eyes are open. We just have to figure out how to do it in a way that keeps us out of the blast radius of the decisions that get made on those platforms that restrict access.
I totally get that. I remember back early in my career, I had an iPod Touch, right? Great little device. One of the
Yes.
coolest things about that is I had 3 or 4 different Wi-Fi scanners on it,
Yep.
right? Both 2.4 and 5 gig. And that was my one of my, go-to in the field tools for a quick check on things. And then all of a sudden Apple said no more.
Yeah.
No more Wi-Fi scanners. We're done. And I stopped updating my iPad Touch so it wouldn't pull those things off my iPod, so it
Yeah.
wouldn't pull it off there. And I was able to do that, and keep it from updating for a good year and a half. And then one night when I went to bed, I forgot to shut it down and updated, and all my stuff was gone. I was sad,
Uh,
you know. But I can totally understand where you're coming from on that. So what now is going to happen with protocol analysis side of things? As far as is it going back to just going to be IPA? What are we looking at there?
well, so IPA is, as you said, it's still alive. There's still a few features in IPA that haven't made their way into the MetaGeek app. So I definitely would like to get the integration of those features completed. And at that point, we'll start a conversation with customers who are still using IPA about migrating over to the MetaGeek app, and we'll figure out how to really finalize that transition. As far as what's next for packet analysis, I think the thing that's most exciting to me is the soon to be launched WLAN Pi Go. So if you were at WLPC, you may have heard a little bit of talk about this. This is a collaboration between Oscium and the WLAN Pi team to produce a packet capture focused WLAN Pi that is made for mobile applications and made for supporting a WiFi Lucid or a WiPry Clarity. So this is a pretty cool platform from a hardware perspective. And we're going to support it in the MetaGeek app, of course. So I think that integration is really exciting to me. When we created IPA, we at that point the Air PCAP and what was it called? Air PCAP. I think it was maybe called NX. Was
NX.
the
Yeah.
yeah. So that was the end of Case Technologies right before they got, or it was actually on the shoulder. They got acquired by Riverbed. They continued to sell through the inventory that they had, and Riverbed pretty quickly made the decision that this is a niche product. It's not really what we do, and the Air PCAP went away, and that put a pretty big hole in the user experience of IPA, not having a packet capture focused Wi-Fi adapter. We've made pretty good progress using third-party adapters based on the Realtek Wi-Fi chipsets and being able to do promiscuous mode and get some packet captures that way. But having a purpose-built device is going to be a game changer. And I'm super, super excited, and I can't wait to see what the WLAN Pi Go unlocks as far as the MetaGeek app.
That's pretty exciting right there.
And one of the things it unlocks is, up to 320 megahertz wide 802.11be, right? So we're going to go forward in time to current, right, to get all of the specs that are currently out there. And that's what makes WLAN Pi so interesting as it gets paired with the MetaGeek app.
Yeah, that the Go is a pretty exciting little gadget. And I'm like, oh great, more money.
Yeah.
It's funny that you brought up that Air PCAP NX, because for some of our systems in the curb stuff, we actually have some 4.9 systems that operate on that, and there's not really like a good way to capture that traffic for analysis purposes. And so I'm actually I've been eBay scrounging looking for some of those because you can put them in monitor mode and then capture on that. It's kind of tough though, because it's like, you're spending $200 on like a 15-year-old, dongle or however old it is.
Yeah, it is funny how collectible old RF hardware is.
I have so many, and then collecting little SD radios on top of that, trying to find alternatives for this and alternatives for that, just to have something to cover certain space.
Well, and it's not just that, there's like the joke about you can throw away that bucket of old cables you have, and it's like, no, you really shouldn't.
No, because as soon as you throw it away is when you're going to need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, Scott, you probably see this pretty regularly too. I mean, we'll go into sites and it's still, there's still like PLCs running from the 80s in some of these places because it's just like they build them like a brick, what house. So it's, I mean, that stuff, it's like you never know when you're going to need to like connect into something with a weird adapter.
Yeah, we go into sites all the time, and a lot of our controls projects are replacing old PLC 5s, that have literally been there, since the 90s, with newer technology.
That was one over the summer. I worked at a startup that's trying to launch a Halo 802.11 AH product, and that was one of the big takeaways for me. That was really my first foray into OT, and the lesson that I learned was, if it ain't broke, by God, don't touch it. So I'm not surprised to hear that, there's PLCs from the 80s that are still working, and therefore wrap it in bubble wrap and just don't touch it. So,
well, and it's all because of downtime, right? They don't.
Yep.
The end point of manufacturing is to make money, right? It's all about creating that product, sell it, make the money. If the production stops, you're not making money.
Yeah.
That's just how that works.
Yep.
And if there is something that has been proven reliable long term, they're very, manufacturing in general is very hesitant to move away from that, because why would I take the downtime to replace it with something that could be less reliable, right?
Yeah.
And in turn, that puts your standard manufacturing plant anywhere in a range from 10 to 15 years behind in technology standards versus a small business and enterprise.
Yeah, and I think when you spoke about the relatively slow takeoff or adoption of Halo, that's a huge factor there, because that is the sweet spot for Halo, is in manufacturing, but it's not a friendly environment for introducing a new technology.
So speaking of new technologies, that's a nice little segue to start moving into, and that I just really wanted to say segue. I think that's
got to work a segue into every episode.
As far as the Oscium side of the house, I know you said you and your brother, Brian, created the company years ago.
Yep.
Where did you get the name from? Where did the name Oscium?
Yeah, so it's the name Oscium and Oscilloscope merged into one. I was totally
going to say, was it because you're Oscium?
Awesome. Yeah, well, and we make Wi-Fi awesome. That's our mission, right? That's our why, is what we do. But an interesting story behind that, right? So when we first started the business, we had this vision for a whole bunch of oscilloscopes, right? And the business plan had a whole bunch of tools in that line of business, and we don't sell oscilloscopes anymore, right? So over time, right, we found the wireless community, wireless professionals, and we love this community. We decided to land and focus here in this space. And it's just interesting, as I look back in time, right, that the business was totally different. In fact, if you look at the business plan, you wouldn't even recognize the business today, right? It'd be very, very different. And some of you that have done businesses and started companies can appreciate that journey, right, of kind of how life and opportunity sort of moves you around. And and Brian and I were working together while Brian was at MetaGeek, right? So we were partnering as Oscium, partnering with MetaGeek, providing them with hardware, providing them with a spectrum analyzer built to WiSpy Air at the time. It was a great opportunity for me to be introduced to Brian Tuttle, right? And I thought, man, that's somebody I really would enjoy working together with, and then we had grand plans for that to happen, and it's awesome to look forward to today, right? Or look and see how that materialized, right? There's a thing too with this continuity of care with the brand that MetaGeek is, and the brands that it that are part of that, connected to that. And Brian, I feel like, connects all that tissue together, right? Scott, to hear you talk about your affection for Channelizer, I mean, that's really fun to hear, right? Because Brian was part of writing that application in the early days, right?
That's
and now he's back
insane.
at it again, which is awesome. So then,
it probably feels pretty good, like, hearing that somebody got value out of something, that you did.
Well, I mean, I preach about the product all the time. And if you go back and you looked at some of my LinkedIn posts, I probably put in LinkedIn in LinkedIn all these various captures that I've done with it, and explaining different things, and showing people how you can easily identify Bluetooth going on in the background and different things like that. And it's the usefulness of that tool is off the charts, but again, especially in the OT universe. So I don't think I can really kind of emphasize that enough. But now Oscium, though, you've got a whole wide range of things.
Yeah.
But we were talking about niche markets before. Manufacturing oscilloscopes, that's a niche market right there.
Yeah, it is. And it was funny. So when we were doing development on the oscilloscope, we were designing it to work with an iPhone. And literally, this shows you how long ago this was. It was before the iPad existed. And so as we're doing development, we're in the middle of development, we're almost ready to release. And then the iPad is released, and we're part of that MFI program. And so the software we developed for the iPhone worked on the iPad. And we were literally one of the first accessories that worked on iPads, and it was the perfect display for an oscilloscope. And so it was just an interesting opportunity. So we sort of made the circuit on the gadget blogs, right? Because of that reality and opportunity. So yeah, we used to be an iOS only shop in the early days of Oscium.
Really?
Yeah, and one of the challenges, Brian hinted on it, it dramatically limits your performance because you need power for performance. And so in order to get what you need for the tools that we create today, right, it requires more current draw. And so some of that was the logic and reasoning in our pivot that we did away from iOS only.
Yeah, I think an interesting thing, just kind of on the the iOS versus Windows, all that stuff. It's like we've run into issues where it's like, okay, we had Intel based Macs, we could run VMs and run Windows stuff, and now it's an ARM based processor, or I hope I said the right thing, but it's ARM based now, and so it's like a lot of stuff just like completely stopped working, and like what happens when they make the next change, or like they just, it's not arbitrary from their end, but it feels arbitrary to us, like, oh, like you can't access this hardware now, and so it just basically kind of guts your ability to use tools that you can develop in there.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a handful of people that use Windows in our company, but it's like we're pretty much exclusively like Apple products. And my boss has been using Apple since probably the 2E. I don't know. But that's, I think, even like our company logo, he said, was like one of the available graphics that was in there or something. Is like, that's how it kind of started. It was like, oh, we could print this cool pyramid thing.
Nice. Yeah, that was always an interesting topic at MetaGeek. We were pretty early on, we shifted from being Windows based to Mac based in terms of the productivity tools, calendar, word processing, what have you. But we have always been a Microsoft shop in terms of being a C# language base, using whatever the current flavor of the Windows UI frameworks is, trying to make use of whatever cross-platform capability Microsoft is currently working on. It's been a moving target, and obviously everybody who's listening to this that is familiar with MetaGeek products knows we don't have very much on the Mac, and that is the cost of using the Microsoft development stack. And we survived for a long time with that Windows focus because Apple was Intel Silicon, and so you could fire up VMware, you could fire up Parallels, and you could run Windows, or you could even use Apple's Boot Camp and run Windows natively right on your Mac, and have, it was the same hardware with a different OS. And so this transition to ARM has really messed up some of those assumptions. And I've definitely heard more from Mac users. Hi, Keith. I hear you. I've heard a lot from Mac customers who are enthusiastic to see some of the MetaGeek tools make their way over to native Macintosh applications.
Well, to be
Well,
fair,
I think
though,
that's
to be fair though, the vast majority of the business universe is on Windows, and so the majority of the people who are going to have access to these tools are on company issued, Windows laptops, right? So
yeah, but
I
but
could
Scott,
totally
you can't help that they're ill-equipped, though.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
I said earlier, the best tool is the one you have with you. So if your company buys you a blunt instrument, you got to use it, right?
No,
So
that's like an ongoing argument in the office here, is because some people, like, they really already kind of live in a Windows world, but we have a preference for Mac products. But that's why some people, like, in some of the last refreshes, just went back to Windows, because it's just more convenient. But I think too, like, just kind of that the ARM is like a good example. Like you were talking about that 950 product as like a black swan event. It's like, what if there's some, like, what if the next iteration of this stuff, you put all this development time in it, and then all of a sudden, like, the ARM, like, you put effort into developing for ARM, and then it becomes something else, and then it's just completely unusable, and it's not the same, it's not the same development process to make it work on whatever the next thing is.
yeah, so and that theme really does show up. We've sort of hammered this point home, and I don't want to belabor it, but the mobile OSs are even more subject to that, because it's this very locked down app ecosystem. You have to pay a 30% surcharge to the provider of the platform, and they have to approve every app that shows up in their store. The exposure to those kind of black swans is much larger, right? Apple switched to the ARM processor. They created this whole Rosetta piece to keep all of the Intel applications running, because business critical software on a PC, whether it's a laptop, a desktop, or a virtual machine that's running in some cloud host, those business applications have to have continuity. Microsoft, obviously, everybody knows about DLL hell and carrying around these DLLs. That, you probably still have DLLs on your Windows 11 machine that were present on Windows 3.1, because the backwards compatibility is so important to those business applications. That's part of the allure to being on a PC operating system as opposed to mobile.
I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode, Global Process Automation. GPA is an engineering and technology firm based in North Carolina, serving clients in industrial processing and manufacturing, focusing on solutions for industrial automation, operational technology infrastructure, industrial control systems, cybersecurity, manufacturing intelligence, and analytics. For over 25 years, their clients have entrusted them with their processes to maximize their company's efficiency and obtain an optimal ROI based upon their assets while protecting their operational technology resources. GPA's mission is to automate, optimize, and secure manufacturing floors everywhere while maintaining their core values to have integrity, to continuously improve, embody their community, remain customer focused, and implement great teamwork. Thanks, and back to our show.
Agreed.
So, other Brian, or Brian, I don't know, it's bouncing back and forth between B squared.
Am I other? No, I think you're other now, Lee.
So you guys have a variety of handheld devices and several different adapters.
Yep.
You have in the show notes that some are now end of life. What was your two kind of mainstays, I guess, are the Clarity, which is now the Lucid, right?
Yes, yeah. WiFi Lucid.
What is yeah, and you're going from WiPry and back into the WiSpy, which makes this old school MetaGeek guy happy.
Yeah, good.
What's our advancements from device to device on those?
Yeah, so if you rewind the clock, so we've been doing this for 15 years, right? We initially did have a 2.4 gig only, no SSIDs, and then as we progressed and grew up in sophistication, we added dual band. Now we have tri-band, right? In fact, and today we have it's a full range spectrum analyzer from 2.2 to 7.25 gig. And that would be the WiSpy Lucid. And so that's sort of the evolution of that particular product line. And of course, y'all are familiar with the Nomad that we sell in partnership with Homina. So that product also kind of expands us outside of the spectrum analysis line of business and into, network analysis. And then, with the partnership and acquisition of MetaGeek, it's become really interesting because, we had always viewed ourselves primarily as a hardware business. And historically, MetaGeek, I think, had viewed themselves as a software business. And that's why we partnered together early on, was to take the best of what we could both bring to the table and create really a super tool, right? With our hardware, their software, and to combine those together to bring the marketplace what we felt like they really wanted, right? And so Brian and I had this vision, and Brian, I don't know how many years ago it was. I want to say 6. It could be more at this point. I can't remember exactly, but it's been a long, long, long time. Pre-Avic acquisition of MetaGeek. I'm going to say 7 just for fun, but it's in that realm. And we wanted to do what we're doing now 7 years ago, right? We were like, hey man, what if we could somehow combine our offerings? Historically, one of our pain points has been the software delivery. I think Brian highlighted some of that. We were chasing iOS and later Android, and keeping up with those platforms for us was very hard, especially with our hardware focus. And so the partnership with MetaGeek was a way for us to bring our hardware focus into their software focus and blend the best of both. And so now we get to do that right today. Brian and I do, which is awesome. And and that's sort of what I feel like MetaGeek does really well. Scott, you mentioned at the very beginning, I love Channelizer. I'm a fan, right? So that sentiment, you're not the only one that feels like that, right? And so being able to pair our tools with Channelizer, with MetaGeek software, it's an awesome combination. It's been so much fun to be part of this culmination, right, of a lot of dreaming and hopes, and then finally for it to become a reality. And when we worked with Avik to acquire MetaGeek, the first thing that my brother and I thought of was actually my brother that thought of it. Let's bring Brian Tuttle back to the fold and have him help us pull this off, right? And that's been an awesome journey to have Ryan back. And I used the word continuity of care earlier because, Brian was part of the early days of MetaGeek, right? And starting what MetaGeek became, right? And so pulling him back into the fold and having the wisdom of all the experience that he has to offer it's made us far better. I've enjoyed working alongside of Brian, and I think we're far better because of it. So to me, when I look at the MetaGeek acquisition, it isn't just the things of MetaGeek, the assets of MetaGeek, the names, the brands, the products. I feel like Brian is all scrambled in that in my head, even though we brought him back
definitely
to be part of
scrambled.
it.
He looks fairly scrambled.
In a good way, scrambled in a good way, because I don't know that I can separate the two, right? And he just brings a lot of domain knowledge, history, continuity. He's actually familiar with the code. So it's just been a really sweet process of us really breathing life back into this storied brand. So,
and if I recall correctly, I think he actually wrote the base code for the 1.21 gigawatt upgrade.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
The
Of course
flux
they did.
capacitor, I think. Yes, he did that. Yeah.
Any
It's funny.
plans on making that a smaller form factor?
The flux capacitor. Yeah,
Yeah.
we are working on that. I appreciate you asking. So yes, that it should be next quarter that releases. So.
So I think we should probably, maybe outline kind of just some capabilities of the hardware. And I think too, like, we should dig in a little bit on like the Nomad, because that's probably the thing that I love about that the most is that, it's, I'm not going to badmouth anybody, but it's a very reasonably priced piece of hardware. And even if you don't go into the Homina ecosystem, now you've got the ability to do like up to 4-channel capture on that using Adrian's air tool. And it's almost like we would just, even if we weren't a Homina shop, it's almost like we would just buy that just to have one of those, because especially in AGVs, I can't tell you how many conversations we've had about like, how can we build like a network of pies or something like that so we can do that channel aggregation capture and, capture roaming events. And it's like, now it's in a nice, like defined case where it's like, we can get to it. So, and you can, and, the interconnection too, with also the WLAN Pi team, it's like, okay, I can hit this thing over Bluetooth. I can capture locally to that device potentially, or stream it back. And so I don't have to physically be like attached to that vehicle with a laptop with my 50 dongles hanging out of it.
Yeah, you all mentioned iOS earlier and portability. Like the Homina team brings, in addition to the on-site software, which stands on its own, they've integrated the WiSpy Lucid into their tool. And so, in addition to site survey, now you get spectrum analysis on iOS, on Mac, right? So the things that we just talked about, right, are by extension available, right?
Yeah, and I think too, you got the Channelizer Lite on iOS too that makes that, so it gives you like a different kind of look too. So you can, because I don't know how much tweaking you can do in the Homina stuff yet with that.
Yeah.
I think it's just kind of a general, like, are you gonna, well, not general, but it's like, do you see any like non 802.11 signatures in there and stuff? You can
Yeah.
get some of that, but if you really want the details, you can also use that channelizer light with that as well.
Yeah, and the channelizer light comes with the bargain basement price of $0.
Free.
So,
Yeah, I call it free 33.
Yeah.
On a similar vein to all that, one of the really cool things that I have noticed, and I think it was, I honestly think Oscium is kind of one of the bigger driving forces behind this, is the integration of your hardware with multiple other vendors' software is a huge deal, because it makes it so much easier for us on the user end to really figure out what we like to use, how we want to use it, and knowing that we have options. Well, if I get this piece of hardware, it doesn't matter what software I get; it's going to work with it. And that, to me, that's a really big deal.
Well, if you rewind the clock back to the WiSpy DBX, that was also true for the DBX, right? It was ubiquitously integrated everywhere, right? And so I think there's some continuity even there with the WiSpy Lucid being well integrated across the board. And quite frankly, we said it earlier, we viewed ourselves originally, early days, primarily as a hardware business, right? And so we were eager to integrate with folks that could add value on software because everyone had their unique opportunity to add value, and so we were happy to integrate and give them opportunity to do that, right? And so,
Well, I think too, like, from our perspective too, sometimes, I mean, it's expensive to get an engineer to go to site. And so to be able to say, hey, I've got an extra, we've got an extra piece of this hardware sitting here. Like, I need you to run this test. Let me send this out. And you can be a smart hand. I could mail somebody a $600 iPad and a Lucid or a Nomad and say, hey, and then I can use the screen mirroring or whatever, and I could remote into an iPad on a site and do and run those captures and stuff. And so it's really nice, but then also have it be like software specific too. So then it becomes even more valuable for us as a user end to be able to have that. Cause it's if you like cats, I'm sorry, but it's like the more than one way to skin a cat phrase, right? Like it opens up possibilities, and that's really the value in tools. Cause it's like, you start putting stuff in your backpack that's just a one unique thing, then all of a sudden you got a 40 or 50 pound backpack, and that's not fun.
Yeah, that's interesting. We in the early days, it's funny because it's almost like a choose your own adventure with MediGeek and Oscium having very similar origin stories. We both built 2.4 gigahertz spectrum analyzer hardware in the early days of the company and developed software that we gave away for free to support our hardware business. Both MediGeek and Oscium followed that same pattern. And we both saw ourselves as hardware companies in the early days and worked with partners. MediGeek had a partner, a guy named David Cook over in Hawaii. He created an app called Iakiu, which is a Mac version of spectrum analyzer software. We partnered with Mike Kershaw, aka Dragorn, the author of Kismet. He was a really important partner for us in the early days. And then, we tried to focus on how are we going to make our software better? Well, we have to figure out how to get paid for software because it costs a lot to develop applications, and it takes, it is a commitment. When you release an application, you then have to maintain that application in order for it to keep performing. And so we started charging for Channelizer, and then that's how we got into IPA and building paid software. And Oscium took the other path and said, we're going to continue to offer free software, and we're going to focus on the hardware. So now we're together, and we're, it requires a lot of thought to figure out how to integrate with software partners now, and how to curate an ecosystem now that we have paid applications and we have hardware that's working with third-party paid applications, and we have hardware that's supporting unpaid applications that are incredibly popular, like Wireshark, for example. So I think we're following a pretty we're putting a lot of thought into it, and I think we're taking a really thoughtful approach to it. And I think that we're going to continue to see ourselves as a member of a ecosystem that is collaborative, and we're going to want to continue to work with partners who are embracing that notion of better together, and producing software hardware combinations that produce the best outcomes for customers. And Hamina is a great example of that.
Yeah, I agree. So, we're talking high level here, so maybe let's dive in and talk about kind of some specifics about, like, what is the let's just take the Lucid, like, what is the, what are kind of the specs that you think really stand out on that as a successor to the Clarity?
Yeah, no, good question. So we highlighted the spectral range, frequency range, right? 2.2 gig to 7.25 gig. But the real differentiator between the Lucid and the Clarity is in the sweep time, right? So we sped the tool up significantly, it's like 2.5 times faster than the Clarity. And so the WiSpy Lucid, it just feels a whole lot more, a lot snappier, and it again gives us the ability to showcase that in tools like Channelizer. As I look back at Oscium and kind of how we viewed our business in the early days, I had a ton of envy and respect for the software sets that we now have as part of our suite as this overall solution that we offer. Channelizer, as a good example, has got, 15 years of embedded expertise and tweaks and improvements. And Scott, I see you shaking your head because, you've seen those over the course of your journey. And Brian's continuing to do that and make investments, right, that move the needle forward. And I think you're going to see those investments flesh out in updates here soon, right, with Channelizer. So, it's fun to be able to take an asset that has it's so mature, and then to be able to tweak and improve it. It's a great starting point for us.
I imagine you guys also, kind of coming together, like it really does seem like a perfect kind of marriage.
It's just, and it's been really sweet and fun to take what both of us viewed as our pains and have them become our strengths, right? And that's just a really sweet thing. And again, better tools for the community is what it ends up resulting with, right? So everybody's happy.
We know it. And one of the things I was just thinking about too, when looking at your hardware, the fact that it covers a nice wide range of capable frequencies, what that really does is that also puts one tool that is usable in multiple countries based upon their RF regulations. So even though channel space in Australia might be slightly different than channel space in the US, that might be slightly different than channel space in Japan, because you cover that entire range of those usable spaces, it doesn't matter, right? Because they're able to see what they need to target for their particular areas.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Jeremy, you asked a specific question about spec variances between tools, right? And I want to actually give you that answer a little bit better here from my side. Like on sweep time, for example, when you look at the WiSpy Lucid on 5 gig, it's 400 milliseconds. And when you compare that to like the DBX right? Significantly faster, right? The DBX was somewhere between 641 and 1587 milliseconds, depending on whether you were low, mid, and high. So the improvement in the experience from a DBX is material, right? And that's also an improvement from the Lucid. The Lucid's 1,000 milliseconds on 5 gig. The reason why I didn't mention 6 gig is because DBX was a dual band, right? So there was no 6E, right? There wasn't any contemplation of that at that time. So, but I think that's the main difference as I see it in the Lucid to the WiSpy Lucid, from the
So was there any kind of, is it still like a similar resolution
Yeah.
to that?
is.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a significant
So
jump in sweep speed.
It is. Yeah, it is.
And that's
Yeah,
interesting
so
to kind of
the-
understand the capabilities of stuff like that, because it's kind of like any of the other tools. Like if you can understand how it operates, then you end up with better captures.
Right.
So the WiSpy DBX obviously did not support 6 gigahertz spectrum, and it was purpose built to only cover the ISM frequencies. So the 900 megahertz, the 2.4 gigahertz, the 5 gigahertz ISM bands. Then the WiPry Clarity was the first really continuous capable spectrum analyzer. So that supports 2.2 gigahertz up to 7.25 gigahertz continuously. Now, Channelizer Lite only supports the preset configurations for 2.4, for 5 gigahertz, for 6 gigahertz, and Channelizer 5 historically has only supported those bands as well. And then the WiSpy Lucid is performance optimized in terms of sweep speed. It is faster sweeping across the 5 gigahertz band. It's faster sweeping across the 6 gigahertz band. It also does a better job of coverage. So when it sweeps across the 5 gigahertz band, the WiPry Clarity is skipping frequencies. So it's actually only hitting about every megahertz across that band, and about every 1.5 megahertz across the 6 gigahertz band. The WiSpy Lucid is staggering those steps so that it is hitting every single frequency as it goes across. So sweeping faster and providing better coverage. And then we've got a release of Channelizer 5 that's just about ready to ship that'll enable the CBRS spectrum. So that'll cover 3.55 to 3.7 gigahertz. So starting to take advantage of that continuous spectrum capability that the WiPry Clarity and the WiSpy Lucid both bring to the table, and basically turning it into a quad band spectrum analyzer. Scott's happy.
Pick me.
Yes.
Does the latest iteration of Channelizer 5 does that show the full range, or is it still locked in to the predefined channel space? As far as
So Channelizer still has to deal with figuring out how to show protocol layer overlays, right? It's the spectrum first application, but it tries to provide this context for protocol. And so it does things like say, this is the 2.4 gigahertz ISM band so that it can show Wi-Fi channel overlays. And so it can show Zigbee channel overlays and things like that. So those limitations still exist. There's preset configurations for 2.4, for 5 gigahertz, for 6 gigahertz, for the different UNII subsections of the 5 gigahertz band. And then there's a preset for CBRS. However, there's also fine grain control in the device settings in Channelizer that lets knowledgeable customers adjust the step resolution as well as the operating range of the spectrum analyzer. And with the intro of the CBRS spectrum, you now have the ability to select anywhere from 2.2 to 7.25 gigahertz as your start and stop frequencies, and the spectrum will display correctly. We don't, unfortunately, the protocol will not support going all the way from 2.2 to 7.25 in a single shot. So it's not completely flexible like a benchtop spectrum analyzer would be, but it does provide a lot more flexibility in terms of what exactly are you looking for? Are you looking for kind of quick overview? Are you looking for a detailed zoom into a transmitter that you've never seen before that you're trying to classify? That control is there.
I've had several use cases where I'm finding something crazy and I could totally use an extra, 40, 50 megahertz to either side of what it's showing to see how continuous or it's going, or even even going from 2.4 to go from like 2.3 to 2.5, on one display, because I've got an interference vector that it's crushing 2.4 and it's obvious that it's bleeding over into 2.3 into 2.5, but I don't know how far. And so being able to make that adjustment would be super awesome.
Yeah. So you'll now have that ability, and then you'll also have the ability to grab a transmitter, and we've long had the ability to create these custom signatures in Channelizer where you see a device that's transmitting, you don't know what it is, and you want to capture that. We used to have it to where you could submit it to MetaGeek and we would add it to the library. We don't have that ability anymore, but what we do have is the ability when you see a transmitter that is a source of interference or a source of mystery and you just don't know what it is, you can create a signature for that, and now you can export that signature to a CSV that is pre-packaged to be consumed by generative AI like ChatGPT or really any generative AI will accept this CSV upload, and you can send it in, and you can actually get the AI's take on what that transmitter might be. So that was inspired by a talk at the most recent WLPC, and we've added that ability as well.
That's awesome, because that's
awesome.
That lit my one remaining hair up top on fire when I was listening to that.
Yeah, David Coleman's talk.
Yeah,
great.
Scott, we should probably add a link to that in the show notes.
I agree. Coleman's a genius. Years and years ago, he did it when I was getting my Aruba certs. Years and years ago, he was one of my instructors for an Aruba class, and that's when I was just like, oh, my first kind of fanboy experience there. Guys, I cannot thank you enough. Before we wrap up, specifically, a friend of ours was asking about what happened to the MetaGeek pirate logo.
Yeah. So the MetaGeek pirate logo is still around,
which is emblazoned on your sweatshirt that you're wearing.
Yes, it's on my hoodie. This hoodie is not. It's not as old as the Channelizer code base. I think this hoodie is only from like 2010, and we started working on the Channelizer code base in 2007, I think. So, but we used to. So when Ryan and I started working together, when I first joined MetaGeek, was around the time that the original Pirates of the Caribbean movie came out, and so we used to say to each other, "Keep to the code." That was kind of a catchphrase. Is like, if we're trying to figure out what we should be doing, we're going to keep to the code. And for us as software developers, that just meant make applications and ship the suckers, and good things will happen. And there's a few other little pieces, like, you know, the code in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. One of the things is anyone that falls behind gets left behind. And so we sort of had that attitude toward the industry, in terms of, we're going to move fast and we're going to challenge the traditional kind of test and measurement industry to try to keep up with us. And then, I don't know what it was, 10 years later, or 5 years later, we came up with the new MetaGeek branding, and it had this little guitar pick shape with a letter M on it. And I was just playing around in Photoshop and made a version of it with with an eye patch and some crossbones to go along with my pirate flag that I used to fly in my office when I was back when I was working in an office at MetaGeek. And Joel printed 3D printed some coasters, and we had a giant version of that MetaGeek pirate logo that we had on the wall in our office, and it all just tied back to keep to the code. It was the culture that we had at MetaGeek was one where we said, we're going to think about what's best for the customer. We're going to lean into this understanding that you get, this visual learning that you get when you see the spectrum for the first time. We want to do that. When we launched IPA, it was because we couldn't believe how much airtime got consumed with management frames in 802.11. And so when we built that tree pie that showed how much airtime was being used for the management frames, it was the same thing. It was like, when you see this, you cannot unsee it. That was our code, and we just wanted to keep it top of mind. So that's the story behind the Pirates.
That's cool.
That's very cool.
And Joel is like glitter, man. That dude is everywhere. It's like anytime I'm like looking something up and I'll find a video, there's like Joel's presenting on something for a bunch of different things.
Well, Joel is keeping to the code now, because he has built this open source browser-based spectrum map. So he's got a kind of like, imagine the old FCC graph that shows all the little rainbow stripes of all the different spectrum frequency allocations. Joel's built a version of that in the browser. So he's turning into a coder, as well as just being a general maker and hacker and BMW fixer and all the other things. So
the infamous potato fi is a force to reckon with. That's for sure. If any of our listeners would like to reach out to you guys, how can they get a hold of you? What's the best way for someone to reach out to you guys?
Spell Brian with an I or a Y, and send an email to either one of those spellings at metageek.net or at oscium.com, and your email will find its way to one or both of us.
You got, and I'm assuming both of you guys live on LinkedIn or any other social media you guys are on?
LinkedIn is kind of my primary go-to. I'm on Twitter, but I'm not as active as I am on Twitter or on LinkedIn.
That can be a cesspool though. So it's
I'm primarily on LinkedIn myself. So
we're certainly most reachable on LinkedIn, but there's a MetaGeek account on pretty much every flavor of social media that's commercial. Every flavor that is fully clothed commercial. So you can reach Brian OnlyFans there.
The MetaGeek.
We don't have an OnlyFans. At least I don't have an OnlyFans. I can't speak for Brian.
No. Send me $5 and you can in a probe request. That's probably a little bit too adult. Well, I guess maybe it's kind of of these, which actually Joel sent a bunch of good questions to me. I think this might be a good kind of final question if we're wrapping up is, what is spectrum analysis missing? And it, from either hardware or software side.
Well, I would have said
Well,
CBRS before this call, and I was, I look back in time at the release of the WiPry Clarity, and we had a continuous spectrum analyzer from 2.2 to 7.25 gig, and no software except for Wi-Fi, which is fine. We make Wi-Fi awesome. That's what we do. But I feel like with even this conversation today, it illustrates why Oscium bought MetaGeek is because here now we're going to unlock the visibility that our hardware has had for 3 years, and yet no one probably even knows that because we haven't had software that displays it. So adding the ability to just capture what the hardware already does and display it has been a pretty big gap for us. And so that's now unlocking with this new CBRS release.
yeah, I would agree that I think the chunks of spectrum that are not filled in are probably the most glaring thing that's missing. So the one that Scott has hit today is sub 1 gigahertz. We definitely still have we have a hunk of spectrum down there that's really valuable because of its propagation characteristics, right? It's a long distance coverage band, and so, and also a backhaul band. So I think there's always more that can be done there. And then the other thing that I would say, it's something that we talk about a lot is, deciding when to get into the frequency domain. And that's the super nerdy way of saying, well, SDR versus super heterodyne in terms of how you're going to build the RF detection and ingest. And so throughout both of our companies' history, we've always used super heterodyne transceivers as the source of the signals. So you're using a low cost radio that's already taken in the RF and converted it into the frequency domain, turned it into a digital readout of signal strength at a given frequency. But there are all these SDRs out there in the world that are looking at things in the time domain. And so they're actually looking at the raw RF before it gets fast Fourier transformed into the frequency domain. It's expensive. And when I say expensive, I mean it takes a lot of computing power. It takes more power, period, to build those type of systems. But that's always a conversation that we're having is how much detail, how accurate of a measurement, how many measurements do we need to be making at once? How many, do we need to be able to look across an entire megahertz of spectrum at once, or is looking at 100 kilohertz the right amount? All that kind of adjustability is more accessible so that's the other place. And then I would say the third thing that we've already talked about a little bit is how do we feed all of that stuff into AI, and how do we use the pattern, the whole reason we love spectrum analysis, Scott hit at this at the very beginning of the conversation, is because it leverages our genuine intelligence, our visual cortex, our kind of superpower that we have as that almost all life on Earth shares, is that our eyes are such an important part of our ability to process information. We turn spectrum into visual information, and we utilize our visual cortex to make sense of it. AIs are coming for that crown. They're providing a lot of intuitive ability that we haven't figured out how to tap into with our organic processors. And so I think figuring out how to use AI and how to integrate that into the software is the other untapped frontier.
Very cool.
That's awesome. Man, I cannot thank you guys enough for coming and hanging out with us today and letting me like completely nerd out and whatnot. Again, I've been a huge fan of MetaGeek for a long time. I have now become a huge fan of Oscium as well. I think the future is incredibly bright for the tool sets that you guys are producing together now. I'm excited to see what's going to be coming up, and really it's kind of coming from a selfish place because it gives me something better to put in my hands while I'm out in the field, and that's what's important to me.
That's why we do it. Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure to nerd out with you, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Thanks, gang. Thanks for having us on. Really appreciate this.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and we hope you join us on our next episode of the Industrial Wi-Fi Shop.